Good morning, Carmen. How we doing?
Good morning, Mr. John. Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So, are the kids on spring break?
Yes, they are
Okay.
here. They are having breakfast right now.
What? It's 10 o'clock. Come on.
Yeah,
It's almost lunchtime.
yeah, but they were busy. They were playing a little bit before breakfast.
Oh, I see. So, sometimes my wife calls this second breakfast. There's first breakfast, you wake up, have some food, and then, do some stuff, and then later you have another breakfast.
Yeah, for my kids, works in differently when they are at a school,
Sure.
and very early they have the breakfast at maybe at 7 or earlier than 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And after lunch at the school, and after they came home for dinner,
Mm-hmm.
is differently.
Well, it's funny because when I was in school, they would start having lunchtime around 10:30 for some of the students because where I went to school was really, really big. There were a lot of students in my school, and so it was impossible for them to get all of the students into the lunchroom at the same time. So they would do these different times, and so I felt bad because the first group had to go at 10:30 in the morning. And usually, it was good for me because usually I was hungry by 10:30. But I felt bad because then you had to wait until you got home to have dinner. So, so there you go. All right, I see Flavia, got it, and Lubna. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mr.
Hi,
John. Good
Mr.
morning.
John. Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, it's
Hi,
good to see
Flavia.
everybody. Yeah, it's been a very cold morning, but at least the sun is out for the moment. So, of course, we have had lots and lots and lots of rain. So, I just want to start off with our lesson today, talking a little bit about the situation that's happened all throughout the state of Kentucky and other places too. But I thought I would take a few minutes and talk about here in the area. Some of you already, maybe you've seen on the news, downtown Cincinnati, downtown Covington, still having a lot of water. But those communities, the truth is that happens a lot. The last time we've had this much water, this much flooding was 2018. So it's not every year. I mean, some years we get high water. This is probably the worst we've had since 2018, which is, again, about 7 years ago. However, these smaller communities throughout Kentucky, some of them have had, terrible flooding in the past. But the problem is many of these communities, the houses and places where they live are very close to the rivers. So I thought I would just take a moment just to update everyone that this is still a problem throughout the state of Kentucky. Any place near a body of water has had terrible, terrible flooding. The picture you see here, I was going to show you, is actually the capital of Kentucky. This is Frankfort. And you can see here from some of the pictures, this, for example, is one of their, this is the large public library that's located in Frankfort. It's a very beautiful building. And then as you can see here, this is the picture I showed you a few minutes ago. So this is, streets literally right along the riverside. In fact, I was in Frankfort in December. I had a book signing. I did a presentation and I did a book signing in Frankfort. And so this is the old part of Frankfort here, this community. So I was in some of these locations back in December. So it's kind of sad to see, for example, one of the restaurants where I ate was pretty much like in this place right here, where you could see off the back deck, you could see the river. And so unfortunately, a lot of these places have suffered. This particular picture right here, this is along the Bluegrass Parkway. So again, outside of Nelson County, just, lots of farmland, lots of places that are pretty much underwater right now. Got it?
Yes, I'd like to ask about if there is a rainwater drainage system. like in between building here and
Well, for example, there are what are called flood walls. You know, these are walls that are built up to protect against water coming in. In just a moment, I'm going to show you the flood wall and flood gate system in Covington, Newport. You know, these places have these kinds of systems. The problem with some of these smaller communities, so for example, you see this picture here, the problem with some of these smaller communities, Gata, is the river, like the Kentucky River, which is what you're seeing here. This is the Kentucky River. The Kentucky River is normally not a very big river. It's not very normally a very wide or deep river compared to the Ohio River. So, of course, many of these smaller communities have some flood control, but it's almost impossible to build these kinds of things in these types of communities. One problem is some of these locations are below the flood level, not above. And so what happens is, if once the water gets over the flood wall, they're trapped. So they can't really go anywhere. So there are some places in Kentucky where it's impossible right now. You have to have a boat in order to get through. This we'll show you here. This is the Frankfurt Bridge that connects one side of the city to the other. So I was on this bridge back in December. You know, the city itself, the river goes kind of in the middle of the city. So again, that's part of the problem. You know, a lot of these small towns were built. You know, Frankfurt's a very old city in Kentucky compared to other places in the state. So in some ways, yeah, it seems like that. But even here, like this is a parking dealership. I mean, a car dealership where they sell cars, located next to the river. It looks like they tried to get some of that out. So again, this is just what's happening in lots of other places around the state of Kentucky. Again, Kentucky has lots of these little waterways. As you can see, this is not from Kentucky here, but again, you can see often people try to drive on the roads where there are water. We talked about this last week. That's not a good idea, but unfortunately, in some places, it may be impossible for them to get to their house. Now, I mentioned in Covington and downtown Cincinnati, so let's take a look there. So, for example, I'll kind of bring this up here on the screen. So let me find there are a couple of places here we can see. Okay. So, for example, this is downtown Cincinnati. This is Smale Park. So I'd mentioned to you some of the downtown parks. Now, in the design of these parks, so Gata, you mentioned about preventing or preparing for floods. The park that's built along the river is designed to be flooded. So if the river water rises and it floods the park, like for example, all of these lights here, they have a system that protects them in case of flooding. So the truth is they actually designed the park in case of flooding to be fine, not to withstand the water. Of course, the problem is it's very dirty and it takes a long time to clean it up. So again, you'll see lots of these images leading in. This is from the Covington side into the Cincinnati side there. And again, you can see some aerial views from this location here. So again, we get flooding in this area, but this is again the type of flooding. This is Riverside over in Covington. So I was here a few weeks ago just taking pictures. Right here, there's a walkway right here. So as you can see, it's completely underwater. This whole bank is underwater. So I was there, and this statue is sitting on a bench. So there are benches here that you cannot see. And there's, so this is always the problem. A lot of these small towns were built many, many years ago, and they've tried many different things to try to prevent them. So again, this is the Riverside district here. It looks like some of the homes might be okay. These historic homes right here, this is the historic district in Covington. So, but as you can see, the water is very, very high. So anyway, it's a problem. It is a problem. We get flooding, from time to time, but as you can see, it can be a problem. Now, I mentioned got flood walls, so I'll show you here just one more, I'm going to show you the ones in Covington.
Is Mr. John there or not?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I can't hear anything. Oh, he's back.
Coming back.
Sorry, guys, I
Okay.
hit the wrong thing. Here you go. So here is the so in, like, for example, in Covington, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Covington, but they have these flood walls. So these very large gates and these large walls right along the river. So that actually has helped a lot in protecting the downtown part of Covington. But still, I mean, it's still a lot of water. And unfortunately, the flood walls in I think in Newport, they may have had some water come in. And of course, you can't build flood walls everywhere. As I mentioned before, many of these communities, the flood wall is here. Many of these communities are in the kind of down from the flood wall. They're not built above. So that's part of the problem. So anyway, I thought I would share some images from across the state. Again, this has been a very terrible weather season for the state of Kentucky. Last year we had the hurricane come through parts of eastern Kentucky. Tornadoes hit part of the state, and then of course we have flooding. So as you can see, guys, spring and winter sometimes can be pretty hard on this part of the country. So anyway. So now, of course, what I'd like to do when we're finished here today is I'll include in the email if you would like to donate any money to any sort of rescue programs. A lot of these communities are going to need a lot of help in getting themselves back together and cleaning and so on. I'll send a couple of links in our email when we're finished today, in case you are interested in making a small donation to help. Again, it's always important to think about our communities, right? So I think here that might be something if you're interested. But I thought what we would start with today is because in talking about these different flooding situations, I kind of thought, you know what, it might be a good time to review. And for some of you, maybe you've never really thought about what are the names of the different kinds of bodies of water that we have in English. So I thought what we would do is take a few minutes and review, and maybe for some of you learn for the first time, what are some of the names of these bodies of water. And then at the end of class, we'll take a little quiz and we'll see if you remember the names of these things. So the idea is I'm going to introduce you to a lot of these words. So we're going to turn on our microphones. So guys, everybody, let's turn on our microphones right now. Okay, so I'm going to say these first, and then we'll come back and review them. Okay. All right. So guys, again, look at the pictures here. So let's say these together. Ocean.
Ocean.
Sea.
Sea.
So examples would include the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean. Examples of sea would be the Mediterranean Sea or the Adriatic Sea or the Caspian Sea. So of course the ocean is the biggest body of water. I think most of you know that. And probably most of you know a sea is basically just a smaller body of water, not counting an ocean. All right, guys, let's say these two words together. Gulf and bay. Gulf,
and
bay.
Bay.
Okay, now you might look at these two and say, well, they kind of look similar. A gulf, for example, usually is kind of an opening into a body of water. A bay, for example, also is like a body of water that opens into another body of water. Now, you may know some examples of gulfs. So we have the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, which is right here next to Somalia and across from Yemen. And then I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but the current president wants to call it the Gulf of America. But I will still call it the Gulf of Mexico because most of us still think of it as the Gulf of Mexico. So you may know these places. And then when it comes to bays, now I'll explain the difference in just a moment, but a bay, examples would include the Hudson Bay that you see here in Canada, the Chesapeake Bay, which is near Massachusetts, and maybe an example would be like the Bay of Bengal. Now, the difference between a gulf and a bay, they look very similar. But the one difference is that a gulf flows directly into the ocean. So gulfs have these, they're surrounded by like land, but they open into an ocean. Bays, on the other hand, have very smaller openings, but they normally do not open into an ocean. They might open into another bay or another river or some other body of water. So normally gulfs flow directly into the ocean, like you see here, like the Gulf of Aden. Okay. Now, again, sometimes the definitions are the differences are very small. And of course, bays can be very big. This bay here in Canada, that's a very big bay. All right, guys, let's say these words together: lake and river. So let's say it: lake,
Lake.
Lake.
river.
River.
Now, again, you probably know what a river is, but let's review what lakes are. Lakes, of course, look like seas, but lakes are normally completely surrounded by water, by land. So there is usually no connection to, for example, to the ocean or to a sea. Now, lakes may be connected through rivers, for example. That can be a little confusing. So when it comes to, for example, these up here, I don't know if you recognize those. These are called the Great Lakes. There are 5 Great Lakes in the United States: Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. These lakes are connected really by these kind of river systems. But the truth is that they are basically surrounded by land. Now, rivers, on the other hand, I think most of you know what a river is and probably have some examples. For example, the Ohio River, Mississippi River. You probably know the Amazon, right? And of course, the Nile is the longest river. But here, for example, if you notice my picture, this is the Ohio River system. So yes, you might be laughing saying, why is it called the Ohio River when it looks like it begins in Pennsylvania? But if you notice, it basically is the entire southern border of Ohio. So that's why we call it the Ohio River. Of course, there are other reasons too. Part of it is the history of the area. So for example, this is West Virginia right here. Well, West Virginia was not a state when the river was kind of, not discovered, but when the river was named. And of course, Kentucky was not a state either. Kentucky and West Virginia were part of Virginia many, many years ago. So you had the Ohio Territory, and then you had the Virginia Territory. But the truth is, it's pretty much the entire southern border. And then eventually the Ohio River continues on and empties into the Mississippi River. Now, rivers, of course, are, more narrow and they flow, right? Rivers flow, we use them for transportation. So here in Kentucky, we have, for example, the Kentucky River, right? That's kind of in the middle of the state. We also have a river that goes north to south, and that's the Licking River. That's the other river that's in downtown Covington. But again, you probably know the Mississippi River, the Amazon, or the Nile. Okay, guys, let's say these words together. We're going to say pond and wetlands. So guys, repeat after me: pond,
Pond.
Pond.
wetlands.
Wetlands.
Okay, now a pond, of course, is a very, very, very small body of water. Now, sometimes ponds look kind of big, but generally a pond and a lake, the difference is size, right? A pond is usually some small little body of water. So if you'll notice, most ponds usually have some local name, right? Somebody's last name, for example, or some particular place. But normally we don't see ponds on like a big map. You kind of have to go on Google Maps and really look closely to see if a pond has a specific name. Yeah, so maybe, for example, we have, Mr. John Pond, for example. So usually they're very small, and some of them are not even natural. Some ponds might be artificial. Now, wetlands, on the other hand, are an interesting situation. They're usually, bodies of water, but they have lots of grass and lots of land around them. Usually wetlands we can find in very hot places, very humid places. We often see, lilies or lily pads. So they have lots of good biodiversity. So, for example, probably one of the most famous wetland systems is the Everglades in Florida. In the Everglades, you can find, alligators, and you can find snakes. You can, and it's a very, very big wetland system. Now, the biggest in the world is the Pantanal system. So this one is in South America, right? And the Ovanco system, I think, is in Botswana and Africa. Africa does have lots of wetland systems too. Lubna, did you have a question?
Sorry, by mistake.
Okay. All right. And then Kentucky has some wetlands in the western part of the state. But the truth is, most wetlands we find in very hot places. So again, it's kind of this combination of land and water where you see a lot of biodiversity. All right, guys, we have 2 more words to learn. We have stream and creek. So everyone turn on your mics. Let's say these 2 words one more time. Stream,
Stream.
creek, and creek.
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 Now, I don't know how many people here have a house. Okay, maybe you have a house, and maybe you have some trees and woods in your backyard, but it's very, very likely, very possible that you might have one, or, of course, some people think these words are the same, okay? But it's possible that you might have one of these in your backyard. For example, guys, I live in Lakeside Park. Now, they call it Lakeside, which is crazy because there are no lakes in Lakeside Park. The lakes that they're talking about are actually ponds. They're just ponds of water. But the truth is, there are lots of creeks in our neighborhood. So you see a lot of these little water systems kind of running behind people's houses. I live also next to a church, and this church has a big, lots of woods. And there used to be a creek, right? There used to be a creek that would run through our backyards. Now, that was a long, long time ago. So the idea is creeks are usually things we find in the woods. We might find them, again, in behind your houses, that kind of thing. Now, streams you often see, again, some people say that these are the same. Some people say streams and creeks are the same thing. But stream is something like you might see here. This is something you might see in more farmland. So again, you might see them in the woods or in a forest. Streams we often see near roads, especially if you drive in smaller towns or communities. And then streams often go through meadows, which is this is a good example of this, a meadow. So a meadow is usually, these rolling hills that you see, no trees, usually it's in the middle where these hills come together. So this might be a stream. Now, you see these, like when you go to Europe, for example, if you go to England or Scotland, there are streams everywhere. You can see streams in every place. It's really kind of nice. I like them. Creeks are places that you see a lot in Kentucky. You see a lot of creeks in Kentucky, and that's because Kentucky has lots of trees and woods. So, for example, class, when we were talking about all the flooding that's happening, so this is what, to kind of come back to what you were talking about, Gada. The problem is many of the creek systems also feed into the river systems and feed into these, types of things. And what happens is when the creeks start to rise, they feed into the rivers, and of course the rivers feed into the creeks. So that's another problem. That's why a lot of these small towns are flooding, because they may not be necessarily next to the river, but they may have lots of these little streams or creeks that connect to the rivers. And of course, when it just rains and rains and rains, you asked earlier about a drainage system. Well, creeks and streams are kind of natural drainage systems, right? They're natural places for water to go. Unfortunately, they have to go somewhere. And I want to remind everybody about the amount of rain these places have received. So again, just to give you an idea, right now, across the state, the average amount of rain we have received so far has been 17 inches of rain. Now, if you remember, we were discussing my camera, like my camera view here. This is about 12 inches. This is about 12 inches right here. So again, think about almost double, not quite, but think about it, almost double this size. This is how much rain we have received. So remember, many of these streams and creeks, they flow into rivers. And then, of course, the rivers, the problem is there's nowhere for all of that water to go. Now, class, it's just April. Think about this. We have already received 17 inches of rain, and it's not even really in the beginning or the middle of spring. So that is a very high amount of water. And bad news, we're supposed to get more rain here in the next week or so. So a lot of these small towns will really have trouble. Now, the last thing I'd like to share is there is one more word I'd like to share with you. And so again, I'm going to erase this here. Okay, so I'll erase that. And then I'm going to share one more word with you. It's a word that you also hear in connection to these smaller bodies of water. So I'm going to bring this information here. First off, creeks are usually in the forest or woods. They're usually smaller than streams. Streams you can see flowing. Creeks really depend on rain to fill. So that's why in the summertime, you might go someplace and the creek is completely dry, like completely. So they're generally not naturally flowing bodies of water. They feed from others. So in this case, that's why creeks normally don't get really high during the summertime, because usually when it gets dry and hot, they disappear. And of course, by fall, they might be empty. Now, guys, there's one more word I'd like to share. So if you want to turn on your microphones one more time, let's say this word together, okay? So guys, repeat after me, brook.
Brook.
Okay. Now, I don't have a picture of a brook because a brook really is the same thing as a stream or a creek. It's just that brooks are usually fed by rain. So in this case, you might see a little tiny little, next time you go to, I don't know, next time you go to the Smokies or someplace like that, you might see this little tiny stream of water coming down. And that might be the definition of a brook. Right? It's too small to be a stream. It's not as big as a creek. It's usually very, very, very small. And as we mentioned before, brooks usually appear only after rain. So again, brooks and streams and creeks generally are the same idea and mostly are fed by rainwater or, when snow is melting. We often see a lot of them. So that's why I wanted to just mention that we see a lot of streams in the mountains. A lot of these streams are fed by rain and snow. So that's why you see them there. Okay. All right. So guys, those are the different bodies of water that we have in English. Now, at the end of our class time, we'll see what you remember. And I will share this list with you. So I'll share the presentation when we're finished. I think it's a good idea just to review these words so you understand the differences among them. And we'll take a moment to review them one more time at the end of our class time. Okay. But I think it's helpful to talk about these because, as I was describing them, I thought, I wonder if the class knows, what a creek is or a stream or, these types of things. So yes, these are all the different words we have. Now, Carmen, in Spanish, right, we also have the word arroyo. Do you know this word, arroyo?
Sí.
Okay. Yes. Okay. We're speaking Spanish. Yeah. Now, what's funny, Carmen, is the word arroyo is kind of like a stream or a creek, but generally you find these in very dry places, like the desert, for example. So maybe if you go to Texas or, New Mexico or some of this western states, sometimes you'll see a sign that will say, don't drive over this arroyo. Right? It'll say don't, because in this case, if there's a lot of rain or water, then it suddenly becomes like a river, right? Like a stream. But in this case, we don't really use the word arroyo in Kentucky. Okay, so that's why I didn't put it on the list. But you can see them in places like, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, a lot of the western states, because a lot of those places have very dry areas. So we also have that word too, but I wasn't going to share that. So All right, thanks, guys. So we'll review those words at the end of our class time. Okay, now we're pretty much wrapping up our discussion this morning of word building. Now, the reason I'm not spending a lot of time on the idea is because I think word building is something that's kind of best done in kind of steps. Okay, and the idea is I don't want to teach everything about word building at the beginning because it's a lot of information. So instead, let's review a little bit of what we talked about in our last class, and then let's learn maybe one or two new ideas today before we get into our activity. Okay? Now, if you recall, we have been talking about word families. Now, word families are groups of words that share the same root word. And then normally what we do is we add prefixes and suffixes to these roots to make new words. Now, we also discussed that word families often follow basic patterns to build words. Now, that's, of course, part of our problem in talking about word patterns. When students think about patterns, they think, oh, these patterns, if I just memorize these patterns, then I will be able to build any word in English, right, Mr. John? I could take any pattern you teach us, and suddenly I can make a new word. Well, not exactly. Yeah. Do you remember, what did we learn about this problem that English has? Why is English so crazy? Who can remember? Why?
Because almost every word
Sorry.
Go ahead,
are
Luna. Go ahead.
taken from different and borrowed from Latin, French, and different places in the world. Yeah.
Right. So, Lubna, what we suggested on Tuesday was everybody in the class just learn Latin, French, Greek, right? And every Germanic language you can. Okay? So, guys, can you do that? Can you learn those 4 things? Maybe before next week?
No.
No? What?
Sorry, no, I can't.
Oh, man. I'm very disappointed in you guys. Okay. Well, now, remember what I've told you before. This is difficult for us, too. Okay? When I say English is crazy, I'm not talking just for you. When I was, learning how to teach English, I thought, as I kept learning and more about the idea, I thought, well, this is all things we learned in school. We had to learn them from a combination of talking and, watching TV and all this other stuff. And of course, going to school too. And then suddenly I realized, oh my goodness, English is crazy. English is really crazy. It's crazy for us too. Now, in our last class, we started looking at what was probably the most predictable pattern, and that was what we refer to here as the verb-based pattern. Now, we're going to review that here in just a moment. Now, I say it's the most predictable, and that's because many of the verbs, so Lubna mentioned a few moments ago, many of the verbs we use in English generally are words we've borrowed from other languages. Languages like French, like Latin, some from Greek, a little bit from Greek. Those languages, of course, are much more, as we might say, regulated, right? They have many more standard rules of how to build words. Now, of course, that still doesn't mean that they're easy, but they follow much more regulated ideas. But today we're going to look at some other patterns, and the first problem is many of these patterns can be very crazy. So we're going to look at these 3 patterns as well. We're going to look at noun-based patterns, adjective-based patterns, and then finally you will notice one of the crazier situations in English is that sometimes the noun and the verb are the same word. And that happens too in English. So again, this is where it gets really crazy because these are words, especially that you're going to have to just learn. There's really no logic to these particular patterns, the last one that you see there. Now, when we're finished here today, I will share this document with you. But again, I understand. Yeah. So I understand that it will be the kind of thing that it's not going to make a lot of sense, when you're trying to make words. But you will see that a lot of the ideas are things that we have borrowed from languages that do have more sort of consistent changes. Now, what I'd like to do here this morning is I'm going to review the different patterns that we generally follow in English. So if you notice here on the screen, there are generally 4 different pattern groups that we're going to kind of organize. Now, the first one is the one we talked about on Monday, sorry. These are the verb-based patterns. And the verb-based patterns are generally ones where we add some sort of suffix to make it a noun and to make it an adjective and adverb. So we will kind of just introduce them today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about their creation, but you will notice that some of these are the exact ones we looked at last class. Do you remember? Let's take a look at them. So for example, we talked about form. So I decided let's put inform here. All right, so again, now you don't have to turn on your microphones, it's okay. But if you want to repeat with me, I'm going to just read through these different patterns. So this is where, again, the verb is the shortest possible root word, okay? Now again, you don't have to turn on your microphones, but if you want to repeat with me, you can repeat. So we have inform. Then the thing is information. Now, normally, we wouldn't think there would be a person connected to inform. The truth is we do, but these were probably created later. So if you want to repeat these with me, informant, informer. Again, these were probably newer words that were created after these words. All right, the next one, adjective, informative. And then the adverb is informatively. Now, one of the craziest parts about word families, okay, so guys, let's think about real families for a moment, right? Think about your family. Maybe you think, oh, Mr. John, my family's not crazy. Okay, well, other people might say, no, your family is crazy. Yeah, so what makes families crazy? Let's think about this for a moment. What makes families a crazy thing for some people? Now, let's think for a moment. Well, for example, someone gets married and then maybe gets divorced, right? Or people leave the family, start a new family, right? Now you might say that's not crazy, but it does make it difficult because the truth is this is not the case for every family, right? Every family, not every family has brothers and sisters. Not every family has grandchildren. Not every family has aunts and uncles, or at least many aunts and uncles. Well, what I'm trying to share with you here this morning is that word families are kind of like real families. Sometimes there are people in the family. Sometimes there are words that fit into these word families. So for example, the word information, if you'll notice, information, later someone created the word informational. And you might say, well, is that a new family or is that part of this family? And you know, what are they? Are they like your stepbrother, your stepsister? I mean, how would you describe it? Well, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I'm just telling you that it's kind of crazy, right? This happens a lot when we build words. We take a root, and then from the root, we create all kinds of families and all kinds of groups. So in thinking about creating these ideas, the key, of course, is to think about their endings. Right? So as we said, ation, information. Sometimes ANT or ER we use for making people. We talked last time about informative, right? Informatively. We took LY and we added it to the adjective. The word informational, on the other hand, is a very kind of recent creation in English. In fact, let's take a look for just a moment. So if I were to show you here on the screen, the idea of informational, right? So if I pull it up here on the screen, you will notice that the word information, I'll pull it up here on the screen. If you'll notice here, this is a website called Etymology Online. This shows you a little bit of history of words. But for example, this often will take, it'll look at every book or everything that's in Google Books, and it will analyze when these words kind of began usage. Well, class, take a look here. as I go through the 1800s, the word informational pretty much didn't exist, right? And then suddenly, as I start to get into the 1920s, right, and 1980s, and up into the 2000s, and now we're here almost in 2019, the word has become something we use more and more. So what does that tell us? Well, it probably tells us this was a word that was created later for some purpose. For example, you may see, like when you want to move to an apartment or move to a different place, you might see a sign or a message that says, come to our informational meeting about this, this place or this product. So you might see this sign, this kind of sign that says informational meeting. Now, if you think about it, well, it kind of makes sense, right? It's a meeting where we get information. So it's a meeting that gives us information, right? So in this case, this was a word that was invented or created. Now, does that mean it's creating a new family? Is it creating this new family of words? I don't know. And that's the thing. Is it part of a new family? Is it the same family? I don't know. That's the part about English that's really crazy, because we can make new words so easily in the English language. English is a very, very flexible language class. So that's one of the reasons why English is so crazy. It could easily borrow words from other languages. So that's nice. It gives our language lots of interesting things and interesting words, but it also makes it crazy, right? All right, take a look at the other examples. So we talked about these two in our last class. Do you remember these two examples? So we have manage. And again, if you want to just repeat there at your phone or computer, you don't need to turn on the microphone, but let's just repeat them again. Manage, management, manager, manageable, manageably. All right, now teach, we have teach. Now we talked about the problem with teach. Teach is not a Latin word. So often when we can't create a word that's a noun, we just put ing, teaching, for example, speaking, right? The person who teaches, teacher. Now, if you notice here, I did mention in our last class that you could say teachably, but the truth is nobody really uses that word. In fact, when I put teachable, if you notice here, teachable, I indicated that that's a very informal word. Okay, so this is not the kind of word you might find in a university, or some formal presentation. When something is teachable, this is something we kind of use just in an informal way, right? If I say this is a teachable subject, or this is a teachable moment, that's something teachers love to say. This is a teachable moment. This is a good moment to teach new things. And you might think, well, Mr. John, every moment is a teachable moment, right? Okay, so again, part of the problem here is these two patterns that you see. Sometimes we follow these patterns with other words. Sometimes we don't. Now, in a moment, I'll give you a word. We're going to come back in a moment. I'll give you a word, and we'll see if we can make a family from that particular word. Okay, so we'll come back and do that in just a moment. But now, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to ask some people to help us with some of these next examples. Now, the next pattern we're going to look at are called noun-based patterns. These are patterns where the noun is the shortest possible word. So when these words came into language, they started as nouns, and then eventually we could, make them into other things. For example, we can often make them verbs. That's something that often can happen. But you'll notice that in some of these patterns, they look very similar. So for example, Gada, would you help us with the first one? Let's talk about peace, right? Peace. So peace is the root word. So can you help us here by telling us the next one? So I'll say the idea, you read the word for us, okay? So for example, if I say the person for peace.
Peacemaker or
Okay.
peaceless.
Well, we'll talk about that word in a moment, okay? All right. Can you read the verb for us?
Okay. Pacify.
Pacify. The adjective?
Visible.
Mm-hmm.
Visible.
Mm-hmm.
Pacified.
And pacified, which again, we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, and then the adverb.
Peaceably. Peacefully.
Okay, thank you. Now, guys, look how crazy this is. Look at it. Peace, peacemaker, peacemaker. What's a peacemaker? You might say, well, it's easy, Mr. John. It's someone who makes peace. Well, again, this is kind of an invented word, right? It's kind of invented. A peacemaker is somebody who maybe right now, parents, you have kids, right? If kids are fighting with each other and you kind of try to stop them fighting, you might be the peacemaker, right? You're trying to stop them from fighting. Now, if you'll notice, though, I highlighted the word pacify, pacified, and then look over here, the noun pacifist. Now, the noun over here, that's a thing, pacifier. We have parents in the room, right? What's a pacifier? I think some of you know if you've had babies, right? Can you tell us what a pacifier is? What does a pacifier do?
It's the small thing we put in the baby's mouth to calm them, to stop crying.
Yeah. So now, guys, is this something you also give to your husband to make him shut up?
It doesn't work for
Doesn't
our-
work. Oh, man. No, all you need, Lubna, is a TV or a phone. Just give them a phone, they can look at it. How's that? Yes. Now, you might ask yourself, well, wait a minute. How does that word connect to the word peace? Okay, well, my Latin language students, okay, those of you who speak Portuguese and Spanish, can you tell us what the word for peace is in your language?
Yes,
Paz.
I can.
All right, let's hear
Paz.
paz, yes. Which actually comes from the Latin pax. So interesting, isn't it? We took the Latin word and turned it into another word family. But the connection between the two is that they both come from the idea of being peaceful or peace. Now, we could say that paz, as we say in Spanish, or pax, as we say in Latin, we could say that's a different family. But again, it's crazy because it's the word peace. It's just that the word peace is how we say it in English. So strangely, we have these Latin words, these Latinized words like pacifist, for example. A pacifist is somebody who is against war. So a pacifist is someone who protests against war. They don't want to fight. They don't want to participate in war. We might call them a pacifist. To pacify means to make something peaceful, to make them be quiet. So, for example, you talked about giving a pacifier to a baby. That pacifies the baby, right? Now, Lubna, I don't know. What pacifies husbands? We said maybe the TV, maybe the phone. I don't know. What pacifies? Anybody have an answer for that one? Big meal? I think that's probably the best answer. Pizza, food. That's a good answer.
And speak less, don't speak too much. It works too.
I'm learning a lot here today. Okay, so just keep giving me advice. Okay, I've been married for 31 years. But I could always use more advice. All right, so peaceable, leave him alone. That's probably the best answer, Gada. I agree. Now, peaceable, peaceful. You might know the word peaceful. Peaceful is when we think about a moment that there's no noise, it's quiet, it's a peaceful moment, right? Now, I'm not going to go through every definition, but what I'm showing you here is the noun-based patterns are already very, very different. And part of the problem is many of the words that came into English as nouns. They came into our language as ideas or things. And that from that thing, right, from that idea, English would create these kinds of words. Now, some of these words exist, of course, in in other languages. I mean, again, peaceful, for example, paz, or pax. Again, these were not originally English words, and they did have some meanings. For example, if you notice, I did not include another adjective from the root pax. I'm going to put it on the screen. I'm going to see if you can recognize it. Now, I think it's interesting that we're talking about this when I just was mentioning an idea at the beginning of class. Let's see if you can make the connection. So, for example, you may know this word. If I said, for example, Pacific. Pacific. Now, class, what did we just talk about?
Ocean.
That's right, the Pacific Ocean. Now, so Carmen, you must have, maybe you have this idea that the Pacific Ocean is this very calm, quiet, very peaceful ocean, right?
Right.
We think of peace, right? Pacific. Well, actually, no. So this word Pacific was chosen as kind of a joke, because when they first saw the ocean, especially if you go to the northern part of the United States, it is not Pacific. It is not peaceful. So in some ways, the Pacific Ocean was named as the opposite of the idea. So it's kind of, it's not quite sarcastic, you know this word sarcastic, but I think it was named as kind of a joke. It's not Pacific at all, is it? It's not peaceful at all. So, but do you know why we don't use the word Pacific in everyday language? Because it really is not a word. I mean, we use pacified, right? But if something is Pacific, nobody uses that word. We only use it for one thing, the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. We don't use it for any other situation to describe. It's just the Pacific Ocean. So as you can see, this is why I didn't include it in our list. English is crazy, class. We can make any word we want. All right, let's look at the next one. So Flavia, would you like to help us with electric? So let's read through that one, okay?
Okay.
So let's start. So the root word is electric. And then you probably notice already there's a word underneath. Do you see it there?
Electricity.
Electricity. Yeah, that's so. We'll talk about that in just a moment. All right. So can you read the person for us?
Electrician.
Okay. The verb.
Yeah. Electrify.
Good. The adjective.
Electrical.
Or.
Electric.
Yeah. And then the adverb.
Electrically.
Electrical. You could just say electrically.
Electrically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't normally pronounce the A in the spelling. Okay. Now, once again, do you start noticing some crazy things, class? Why do we have two nouns, electric and electricity? Well, electric was the original word. Now, what's funny is this. When something is electric, we're usually using it now as an adjective. Like when something is electric, we're thinking about like exciting, like it's an electric moment, right? Like electricity, you know, when you're watching something in like a sports or some kind of activity and it's so full of energy, right? It's an electric moment, right? This is how you feel in English class, right? Every week like this, right? We feel electric. Okay, now this is me. Okay, this is me. Thanks, guys. Now, here's what's funny. What do we mean when we say electricity? What's electricity?
Light.
Yeah, it's in your house right now, your apartment. Think about it right now. Which things in your house need electricity?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah, lots of things. Yeah.
Yeah, can you remember what life was like 200 years ago? 200 years ago, maybe they had lights, maybe, but no, everything was fire, candles, right? I mean, can you remember what smartphones were like 200 years ago? Yeah, it's called open the window and hello, just talk. Yeah, we didn't have phones, we didn't have cell phones 200 years ago. Come on. So electricity is what you have in your house. Now, here's what's funny. What's funny is when I first met my wife and her family, when they would talk about the electricity in the house, they didn't say electricity. Do you know what they would say?
Electric.
They say the electric. So they would say, for example, if the lights would go out, right? If there was no power, they would say, oh, the electric is out. And then, of course, I was confused. I would say, well, the electric, everything is out. What do you mean? Because I said electricity. See, I was thinking about that's what we used, right? So some people use the words the same way, electric, electricity. Can we guess what an electrician does? What does an electrician do?
Maybe someone who fix the electric problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Electricity problem. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So electricians, of course, I have a joke, Lubna. Do you want to hear my joke? So I'm going to ask you again, what do electricians do? The answer, charge you a lot of money. That's what electricians do. So there's the joke. Okay. But of course, part of the joke is charge, right? Charge. You charge electricity, right? Charge you. Okay. It's a terrible joke, but there you go. All right. Electrify is to make things electric. So, for example, if you think about it, we had to electrify cities. We made cities electric. Okay. Okay. So again, what I'm just trying to show you is the patterns for these words. Very difficult. Very difficult. And the problem is you have to know a lot of these words. All right, let's look at the last example. So Miriam, would you like to read this one? This one might be a little more common. So Miriam, let's try this one here for economy.
Okay.
Okay, so would you mind reading the noun as a person for economy?
Yeah, economist,
Okay, the verb,
economize.
the adjective, you'll notice there are two.
Yes. Economical.
Let's try it again. This one's a difficult one. Economical.
Okay, economical,
And then economic.
economic.
Good. And then the last one, this is really hard. Can you try it?
Okay, well, economically.
Good try. Economically.
Economically. Okay.
Yeah, that takes practice, especially these words that are Latin words or come from Greek originally. For example, this particular word here is a Latin term. But the idea is you all probably recognize this one if you speak Spanish or Portuguese or French or Italian or some other Latinized language, because this is, again, a word we borrowed. But if you notice, economy, we had to kind of create some words like economize, to economize. Now, that's a difficult thing to think about. What does that mean, to economize? Well, economy is talking about the world economy, right? The money we spend, or the United States economy. But it also refers to the economy in your house, how you spend money. So in this case, when we say economize, this is what we might do to try to save money. So, for example, when we try to economize, we try to think about, well, what can I do to make my, to cut the prices, to save money, to reduce electricity, to stop using, stop watching Netflix or some of those systems. So the idea is when we economize, it's basically just we're trying to save money. But economically, these are all words that you've probably heard in more formal ways. But the idea is we had to create many of these verbs, again, to pacify, electrify, economize. These are actions that we had to build because they did not come to English as verbs. They came to English as nouns. And they began as nouns, and then we kind of invented or created these endings to fit. So even like economist, for example, this would be a pattern that we would follow. Okay, now we'll come back to this pattern in just a moment. Okay, but there you go. So those are noun-based patterns. And again, part of the challenge is you have to know something about the words and how they came into language. So we're not going to worry too much about it, but it does show you have to learn lots of words to figure this out. All right, now pattern number 3, This is the pattern I was talking about earlier. This is the pattern where the noun and the verb are the same word. And part of it will depend on how did the word come into English. Now, I'm not going to ask for volunteers for this one. I'm just going to look through this one very quickly. So again, when we say that the noun and the verb are the same, if you look here and here, you will notice that they are exactly the same word. Value as a noun, the value of something, like how much it costs. Or we also use it as a verb. I value your friendship, right? I think your friendship is very important. Help, some of you know help is just something we ask, but it also can be an action. Please help me, or I will help you tomorrow. Now, believe it or not, there is no noun as a person for the word value, but we do often use help as a kind of a generalized word for just people who come to help. So sometimes people might use the word help, like help is coming, right? As like people are coming to help you. So like those river towns, for example, we might say people, help is going to come and help. Help is coming. People are coming. Some people also use this word for like, the people who might live in a house and clean the house and take care of the children, like housekeeper, for example. But they might refer to them as the help. That's not a very friendly word. I don't like that word for people. That sounds like you don't have a name. But in this case, you hear that, especially in older or historical situations. Now, if you look carefully, though, at the adjectives and adverbs, I think you might recognize these are fairly common. Valuable, right? Valuably would be the adverb. The adjective help, you probably know that many of them use the word, the suffix full, right? Helpful, it's full of help, right? Helpful. And then we have helpfully. So now, the problem with this pattern, of course, is you have to know if the word is a noun and a verb at the same time. And sometimes you don't always know that. So you go to a dictionary, you see, oh, it's a noun and a verb. So again, this is a situation where it might be a little difficult to know. All right, now the final pattern is one that is really crazy. And these are the adjective-based patterns. These are words that came into the English language and they began as adjectives. So if you look at the three examples here, you will notice already some crazy things. First off, many of these words are probably much more like the older English that we used to speak. So in some ways, some of these are words we borrowed from other languages, but some of them you will notice have changed. For example, the last one, strong. You've probably noticed this already, but strong is one that's really crazy when it changes. So in a moment, I'll ask for some help with these. But again, if you go back to the first one, real. Some of you probably know this word because it looks very similar in other languages, right? So this is not, again, exclusively an English word, but you'll notice that it follows some of the same sort of changes because it came to the language as an adjective. So let's take a look at these examples. Maybe Gada, would you like to read these for us for real?
Okay. Real,
Mm-hmm.
realistic.
Okay, the verb?
Realize.
Mm-hmm. The noun, thing?
Reality, realization.
Mm-hmm. The person?
Realist.
And finally, the adverb.
Really.
Which you probably recognize that one, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, this is one of these situations where where the word became a verb and realize, and then from that family, we created kind of a, I don't know, stepbrother, stepsister, I don't know what you would call this, realization. That comes from the verb, not really from the adjective. Now, realize, I think some of you use this word in your language differently from how we might use it in English. For example, in some languages, we use realize to be like to make it true, right? Or to make it real, right? So for example, I think in some languages you might say he realized some money, like he made this, he achieved or he got this money. In English, on the other hand, we do not use the word realize like that. Can anyone remember, how do we use the word realize in English? Does anyone remember?
There is another verb. It's similar. It's to notice.
Yeah, so to
When you
notice.
realize or you
Yeah.
notice something.
Very good. Yeah, notice, even kind of begin to understand. Yeah, so sometimes we realize something before we really understand it, right? You might notice it and then start to understand something. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, so in this case, Flavia, we probably use it differently from how you might use it in other languages. Yeah, so maybe it's similar to notice something. A realist is somebody who tries to think about reality, which, if you notice, I didn't put it as a direct connection, but it is from reality and thinking about what is real and what is not real, right? You might even think about realistic. This is a kind of a later use of the word. When something is realistic, it looks real, but maybe it's not exactly real. So again, this is one that came from the adjective real. And again, it shows you it's really hard to know how it changes. All right, let's talk about the next one. Maybe Tiaba, would you like to help us with weak?
Weak, weaken,
Mm-hmm. All right, the verb.
weakness,
Mm-hmm.
and weakling,
Yeah. And the
and
adverb.
weakling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now remember, thank you, Tiaba. Now remember, class, this is the adjective. So normally we create adverbs from the adjective. So real is really, weak is weakly. Okay. Now, again, weak is one of these crazy words where you can see we had to create a verb to make something weaker, to weaken something. Now, we were talking at the beginning of class about, how rain, can affect the walls of a place, and eventually the walls might collapse, right? Might fall down. We could say the water is weakening the walls, right? It's weakening. It's making it weaker. So in this case, weaken is the word we're talking about. Weakness. Some of you may have heard this word before. If you have a weakness, it means you're not very strong, or you have some problem that you need to fix. Maybe it's some character or personality issue. Now the word
interview.
yeah, like in an interview, for example, they love to ask, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Mm-hmm. The word weakling is often referring to someone who probably is not very strong, but maybe it's because they're also kind of sick, like they don't have good nutrition, or they just don't have a lot of energy. A weakling is someone who just needs more strength, right, to get stronger. All right, let's look at the last one. So Carmen, you want to try this one? So the word is strong. Okay, so Carmen, would you like to try the others? Okay, well, she might be busy. So let's see. Lubna, maybe you'd like to read the next ones for us.
Okay. Strong.
Okay, so the verb.
Strengthen.
Strengthen.
Strength.
Uh-huh. No, there's really no noun. Yeah. And then the adjective, the adverb.
Strongly.
Strongly. Okay, very good. Now, again, this is a really crazy word. This was a word that probably began as a Germanic word. So if you notice strength, we have the noun strength, and then we kind of came back and created the verb strengthen. But the question is, why did we use strong? Where did that come from? How did we get strong from strength? Well, English is crazy. I don't have an answer. A lot of these words were created before we would write them. So often they would create different pronunciations too. So this is one of those words that probably had some different pronunciations in different places, and then they try to put them together in some sort of, idea like we see here. Remember, when we learned English before schools, before language, there weren't a lot of rules connecting these different languages. Flavia?
Oh, that's interesting. I understand there is no word for the person who is who is strong,
Mhm.
because if you say stronger, it sounds like you compare one
That would be a
person to
comparative.
the
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, no, that would be a comparative adjective, yes. But the truth is, it's not. We wouldn't say that he is, a stronger, like he's a person. We might say a strong person, but there really isn't a word that we use for it. So it is kind of interesting. Yeah, there is no person that we would use from it. But again, I don't have, as you can see, even just talking through this list can show you how crazy English is, right? It can really show you how it is. So part of the goal I just wanted to show you here this morning, I am not expecting you to memorize these lists, but what I'm expecting you to think about is how these little patterns can help you in thinking about how to change words in language. So what I'd like to do is, let's just take a few examples. Let's go back for a moment to the verb examples, right? So we have inform, manage, teach, right? So let's think of another verb that we could use, and let's see if it follows in these particular patterns. So again, let's just choose a simple word, and I think we'll notice one of the challenges in following a pattern. For example, if I chose the word go, right? So let's already take a look and see, does it fit into this pattern? So for example, if the verb is go, is there a noun or a thing that would fit? Well, look at my three choices: ation, meant, or ing. Which one do you think?
ing.
Seems to
ING.
make sense that maybe going would be
Going.
a noun, but that sounds kind of weird, right? The going, going is difficult, yeah, that sounds weird, but maybe that's it. All right, now is it possible to make a person from go? Is there a goer or a goant, or is there some other ending for go, a person who goes?
I don't think so.
Okay,
There is
so
no word for that.
doesn't really seem to fit. All right, what about adjective? Goative, goable. What do you think? Is there an adjective for go? Goeful? Go? I don't know. Yeah. So if there's no adjective, there's no adverb. All right, now class, why do you think go doesn't fit into this pattern very well? Does anyone have any guesses? Yeah. What do you think? Flavia, I can tell you're thinking. What do you think?
No, I couldn't. I couldn't come up with anything about that. I'm still thinking about it. Actually, now I have the conclusion is English is crazy.
That is the answer to
Yeah,
every
that's my conclusion for
question,
today.
Flavia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I will give you my suggestions, hints. Again, I'm not a historian of English necessarily, but one of the things we have to remember: go is an irregular word in English. If you think about it, when we change go into the past, we say went. When we make it into a participle, we say gone. That's one possibility, that it's a very irregular word. It just doesn't seem to fit into this example. Another possibility is it's a very old word. If we go back for just a moment and type in the word go into our etymology search here, let me bring it up here on the screen. If you'll notice, it gives us the interesting thing about this website is it gives a very detailed history of a lot of information. But I'll just highlight a couple of things. If you notice here, it says Old English. That probably tells us already why this word doesn't really fit. It probably began as a kind of Germanic, very old word that just doesn't seem to follow these patterns. So in some ways, Gada, you mentioned it wasn't invented yet. Here's what I'll tell you is a very real possibility that you're kind of correct. This word probably existed before we thought about creating these regulations, right? These rules for language. Again, it's basically, if you look through this list, I mean, it's really, really very detailed as to where the word began. So again, that tells us a little something, a little bit. I can't say that it explains everything, but it doesn't really seem to fit. So not every word is going to fit into our situation. Okay, now let's take a look at our nouns. Let's take another example of a word that we largely use as a noun in English, and let's see if you guys can help us out. For example, if I put in the word here, this is another topic, another idea that we think of as a school word. Let's take the word biology. Biology. This is a Greek word that actually combines two roots. Bio, which means life, and ology means study. So this is a word that came into English as kind of a study, an area of study, biology. All right, so class, let's see if you can help me. Can we make a person from biology?
Biologist.
I think could
Okay.
be biologist.
Probably. Okay. All right, what about the verb? Can I biologify or biologize or bio something? Do you think there may be a verb of this word?
No.
Yeah, Tiaba's
I-
thinking. Yeah, so I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, what about an adjective? Look at my choices here. Do you think there could be an adjective for biology?
Maybe biological.
Biology, yes.
Yeah, biological.
Biological.
Okay, good. Okay. So if there is an adjective, biological, there's probably an adverb, right? So what do you think?
Biologically, biologically, something
Yeah,
like that.
take your time. Yeah, don't go too fast. Biologically, yes.
Biologically.
Yeah. Now, this one seems to fit somewhat into the pattern. And again, that's because the Greek language, that's what this word comes from. Remember, this is a Greek word. Greek came before Latin, and Latin borrowed a lot of ideas from Greek. So Latin was one of those languages that really had a kind of regulated way to put it together, right? So again, languages like Latin and Greek, and Greek and Latin and Spanish, and all of these languages that followed from these particular rules often do have very predictable patterns. But that's not the case for every word, right? I mean, there really isn't. Some words we just kind of create, and they may have come into our language as a noun or a verb, but this is one where we can easily guess. Biology is a word that, yeah, follows some particular rules. There's no verb for this word, but again, the idea is it does seem to fit most of this pattern. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about where the noun and the verb are the same word. Now here's a funny one. I'm going to choose a word I think that everybody knows. So the word iron. What's funny is iron came into our language as a metal, right? We think about something that's made from iron, but we also can use it as a verb. Now, guys, do we know what iron means as a verb?
Iron
Yes. The action like when you are iron the clothes.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have a question. I have a question here for everybody. Do you guys still iron stuff?
Actually, I'm not. I stopped doing that.
I want to see. I want to see who is ironing in this class. That's what I want to see, because what's funny is every few years, my wife and I decide, oh, we need to iron, something. So we buy an iron. We use it once, and then it just sits in the closet for the next 10 years. I do not want to buy any clothes that need ironing. So maybe that's why I like online. You can't see if my clothes are a mess. All right. Okay, now let's look at the rest of this. For example, is there a person who irons?
Iron Man.
Iron Man.
That's
Good
a
guess.
good one.
That's a good one.
I like this idea.
Yeah, I don't know if Iron Man is going to be Iron Husband, because I don't think Iron Husband is going to iron clothes. That's a pretty good guess, Gata. But the question is there a person who irons? Do we have a particular ironer or ironist or something? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
No,
and
there is
as
no
we
name, no
and as
word.
we said before, it's not going to be husband, right? Okay. What about an adjective? Can we describe something as something that you can iron? Can it be ironable?
Ironed. Ended with ed.
Yes. So
Iron.
now one of the things we can talk about is, I did not include it on this list, but you are correct. It is possible to create participles. So for example, we could put ed on all of these words and we could use it as a way to describe something. I would argue that that's probably more common with this word because of how we use the word today. So for example, if you said, right, these pants have been ironed, right? These are ironed clothes. Well, we can see, right? We can see if the clothes look nice, or if I iron them, if they're burned, right, in several places. So in this case, yes, we could use it as a participial adjective. So Gata, you are correct. That is a participial way to use an adjective with nouns and verbs. So I guess we could put it here as well. But if I use ed at the end of the word, can I put ly and say ironedly? Would that make sense? No, probably not. Okay, so Gata, you have observed something very interesting. Many of these words that we use, we create, they have different meanings or purposes. Yeah, sometimes we don't really have any other family members. So yeah, maybe we put an ed at the end. We got ironed. Gata?
Is it come from a passive sentence?
You can use it in different ways. Like I said, you could use it as a participial adjective. So for example, if I said the ironed pants, I'll give you an example. Like if I say, where are my, did you iron my clothes? And you might say, the ironed pants are on the table, for example. So in this case, you could actually use it as an adjective. It's describing, do you remember we were talking about in our other class, restrictive and non-restrictive? So in this case, you're restricting the group of pants. Which pants are you talking about? So the iron pants are there, right? So Gata, think about it like this. If I said the pants that were ironed, right, it would be a passive voice sentence. But you could also make it an adjective. So it's, in a way, it's participial. Yes, it's a passive adjective, but you are correct. But it's complicated. See, I'm already spending a lot of time explaining it. So, okay. All right, and then let's look at one more. Let's think about another word, for example, that has come into English as an adjective, right? So again, we have words like real and weak and strong, right? So for example, if we took another word that came into English as an adjective, okay, so okay, I'm going to put it here on the screen here. Hold on. Okay, so for example, let's take this one here. This is a good one. Okay, well, hold on. I was going to use, okay, there we go. This is a good one. Give me just a second. I'll put this one on the screen. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, for example, this is I wanted to mention one because we were talking about citizenship, right? So, citizenship, the class we were going to discuss the opportunity. I sent an email to see who's interested in citizenship. Well, the root of the word citizen is the same root as the word civil or civic, right? So let's talk about the first one, civil. Civil. Now, when we use the word civil, we usually use it to say this person has an education or this person acts in an educated way. So you might know civil as the root of some other words. For example, let's go to the noun as a thing. Do you recognize civil? And look at the choices here we have as a noun. What do you think would be a word we could make from the word civil?
Civilization.
Yeah, so for example, that's probably the one we might know the most, civilization. We also have a word that we've created from civil referring to behavior, civility. Civility is when we act in a nice, respectful way, right? We show civility. We show this action of acting nice towards other people. Okay. All right. Do you think there might be a person that we might use from civil? Can we say a civilist or a civiling or? I don't think so. Yeah, we don't really seem to have an example there. But of course, we can create an adverb, right? If we have, for example, civil, how would you create the adverb? Okay. We would create civilly.
Civically.
Okay. All right, so civilly. So civilly is to act in a civil way. I'm still acting civilly towards this other person. All right, coming back to the verb, this is the problem with these patterns. We didn't create the verb from the word civil directly as much as we created civilize, which if you notice is very similar to the word realize, right? So in this case, the verb form would be civilize. So in this case, this is a word that came to English as an adjective, and then we kind of built words around it. And then we have civic, for example. Civic is referring to, again, civic behavior as well, or also a study of civilization or a study of how to behave. So, for example, maybe some of your children are in school and they might be taking a class called civics. Now, civics is also something we think about when teaching citizenship, right? How to behave in society, how to follow rules and laws using a civic behavior. So civic is often referred to the behavior of people in society, like the civic behavior you might have with people in a town or city. Okay, now guys, our time is just about up for today. And as you can see, just in describing and talking about all of these word patterns, it's very complicated, isn't it? Think about how many words you have to know before you start to recognize these different forms of the word. Now, the last thing I want to share here this morning, and again, I don't really want to spend any more time necessarily because it would take us years really to learn every word and talk about their meanings. But the other problem sometimes is that when words often create new families or they join or we create these new word ideas, sometimes they change meanings too. Again, coming back to the word real, right? Well, to reel and realize, well, that makes a lot of sense maybe in French, Spanish. Doesn't make as much sense in the United States, in American English, for example. We don't use realize the same way you might use it in another language. But when we also think about reality and realization, well, again, these words came from these different ideas. Reality kind of came from real, but realization was created from the verb. So this happens all the time. This happens all the time in language, English especially, because English is a very flexible language. We can make all kinds of new words. And sometimes students create new words and they say, Mr. John, this looks like a good word, right? Or maybe your children, if they're learning English and they start using these creative words and making words. Well, that's because English does have this very highly flexible idea. We can borrow, we can use words from other languages. But the problem is when we borrow these words, we often borrow their changes too. We often borrow their family patterns from the languages where they came from. But now you can see part of the problem. Many of us did not speak English in these different periods of time. Again, the word strong, for example, just think about this as our final comment. The word strong does not seem to follow any pattern. Look at it carefully. We got strong and strongly, but then it becomes strength and strengthen. What? Well, that's because this particular word had a different way of changing. And these changes happened before we created a lot of these rules that we use today. So, class, there's the reality, right? There's that word. That's the reality of English. Unfortunately, English is also a language of history, and all of the ideas we borrowed and all of the way we changed words in the past, we kept a lot of those rules too. Okay, so class, all I can tell you right now is, it's important to realize. Okay, there's that word there, realize. It's important to realize that English is difficult for English speakers too. Okay, so let's have sympathy for everybody. So have sympathy for your children if they're in school, because it's hard for all of us. Okay. Now, when we're finished here today, I'll share this document with you. Now, I'm not asking you to memorize it. I don't think that's not really possible. That's not really a good idea. But at least it shows you that English does have some basic rules of change, but those rules don't always follow the same way. Okay. All right. Now we keep forgetting. We keep running out of time to do the activity I had planned a couple of classes ago. So I promise we'll get to that activity. We were going to look through the reading and find some more suffixes. I promise we'll get to that in our next class. Okay. But I wanted to share this with you here today. So, all right. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We'll, like I said, we'll finish the other activity in our final class. Now, I did mention we had a quiz, but we ran out of time. So the idea here is let's just, instead of using emojis, let's see if you can identify these words right now. You can use microphones. Let's see if anybody remembers this one. So real quickly, guys, look at the pictures real quickly. See if you can tell me what these are. Who knows this first one here? What picture is this of? Is this an ocean, lake, sea, or bay? Anybody want to guess?
Ocean.
Too small.
Bay.
Too big.
Sea.
This is a sea. Yeah, this is the Mediterranean Sea. So remember, a sea is not as big as an ocean, but it's bigger than the other things. All right, let's try the next one. See if you recognize this one. All right, what about this one here? It's got a small entry. Looks like this.
Bay.
This
Bay.
is this is a bay. Okay. Okay. All right, the next one. This one should be easy.
River.
This is a river. Yeah, so this is the Ohio River in this picture. Okay. All right. This one, very small. Ducks, geese.
What?
Creek.
Pond.
I've heard 4 different answers. Yeah, the answer is pond. Remember, pond is like a small lake. Very small lake. So usually you see little animals like this in it. All right. And then this one.
Wetlands.
Good guess. Very good. These are wetlands. Wetlands are kind of a mix, right? Okay. All right. What about this one?
Creek.
Creek.
Yeah, this is a creek. So again, very small. All right. Okay, guys. Well, again, I'll share that with us after we're finished. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next Monday.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good day.
you.
Take care, guys. Bye. See you on Monday.
Take care. Bye-bye.